Faites appel, s'il vous plaît, Madame le greffier.
Monsieur le Senator Gorst.
Présent.
Monsieur le Senator Farnham.
I think we're muted, sir.
The greffier is muted. It doesn't matter that I am at this point, but thank you very much.
I'll start again. Monsieur le Senator Gorst.
Présent.
Monsieur le Senator Farnham. Madame le Senator Ferguson. Monsieur le Senator Lafondre.
Present.
Madame le Senator Valois.
Present.
Madame le Senator Moore.
Present.
Monsieur le Senator Pallet.
Present.
Monsieur le Senator Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Hélier.
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présente.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Jean. Monsieur le Connétable de la Trinité.
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Marie. Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Madame le Député Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Southern.
Présent.
Madame le Député de Grouville.
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Lewis.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Tadier. Monsieur le Député Higgins.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Masson. Madame le Député Pinel.
Présente.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Martin. Monsieur le Député de Saint-Bon.
Présent.
Madame le Député Doublé.
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Labbé.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Wickenden.
Present.
Monsieur le Député de Sainte-Marie.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Truscott.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Young.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Ash.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Morel.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Guida.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Pierre.
Present.
Monsieur le Député de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Jean.
Present.
Madame le Député Hegra.
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Ayer.
Présent.
Madame le Député Pershard. Monsieur le Député Ward.
Present.
Madame le Député Alves. Monsieur le Député Pamplin.
Present.
Madame le Député Gardner.
Présente.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel, le Tout-Puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, donner le cœur et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, et de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute leur délibération et ton accompagné de la bénédiction réussissent au bien-être et au soulagement du peuple qu'il te plut de commettre à leur soin. Car nous t'en prions en nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui est aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien. Et nous pardonnons nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous ennuie point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi la reine, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Present. I'm sorry, I don't think I did hear my name called, I think, in the background, but
Madame le Senator Ferguson,
Excusez.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Jean,
Excusez.
Monsieur le Député Tadier,
Excusez.
Monsieur le Député Masson,
Excusez.
sorry, I missed out. Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Marie,
Excusez.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Martin,
Présent.
Madame le Député Perchard,
Excusez.
Madame le Député Alves,
Is Deputy Alves malade or it was to be excusé?
Malade. Malade.
vous jurez que Madame le Député Alves est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé. L'Assemblée est non, Monsieur le Président.
So it's Deputy Tadier. I don't know if I'm here. I put it in the chat, but I don't know if I was
I
called.
know, I'm afraid we marked you as excusé, but we'll mark you as présent.
Thank you.
Les États sont constitués. We now continue with consideration of the land transactions understanding Order 168-3 Office Accommodation Project Union Street St Helier, referral of approval P18. I have no members listed to speak, so does any member wish to speak? Deputy Martin.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'm not going to overly rehearse the arguments that we had yesterday afternoon. We spoke about costs and the blasé approach we seem to be taking currently to spending tens and hundreds of millions of pounds. We spoke briefly about process, and I can't understand how a process for an alternative site is just so easily transferable to another site, and I believe that needs investigation. We spoke about timing and how we flit between sites at the drop of the hat and pretend that it's all in the plan and under control. And that concerns me greatly, how we can move so fast from one site to another. And we spoke about value for money. And when things happen as fast as this, I certainly haven't been made fully aware of the value for money and why this hasn't been scrutinised better. Sir, our office strategy is, to me, a disappointment. We've had the Fiat over Angle, Lamott Street, options in Broad Street, where we are and where we might be, and then Cyril Le Muckle House itself. And sir, I've always been concerned about Cyril Le Muckle House, because who in their right minds moves out of a building and leaves it empty to go off and rent somewhere else at the cost of millions? And we keep being told about money to be saved, but we have spent millions and millions of pounds in Broad Street so far on a full repairing lease, renting a building, while our previous office has been left empty. And that, to me, is a disgrace. And then there's the element in the room, sir, the bec noir that the Chief Minister won't mention, because, let's be honest, he's never really been a fan. And yes, I'm talking about the Jersey Development Company and the International Finance Centre. First we were told there wasn't space there and it wasn't an option, but that's no longer the case because it's now accepted that the law officers need to stay separate and independent, and that it wouldn't be right to put services in a building such as this. So when it was a private developer tendering for a privately owned site such as J1 in Broad Street, this provided good reasoning for not selecting the Jersey Development Company, as uncomfortable as that might have been. However, we now have a private developer building government's new headquarters potentially on a government-owned site. It's going to appear, and it does appear, very, very strange. And it's going to send a message to the market that the product potentially being delivered by this third-party developer is superior to our own development company. So we've got to remember that JDC's remit is set out in the company's Articles of Association and says the following: they are to act as our preferred developer for projects of property holdings. And that's been agreed and as directed by the Regeneration Steering Group. And that means that they were and are in the perfect place to deliver our new headquarters. That site at IFC2 has a full planning consent. Its delivery is therefore significantly de-risked. And it's also the first and currently the only office building in Jersey designed to achieve BREEAM Outstanding, which aligns government's own commitment to the environment and to sustainability. And interestingly, the BREEAM Outstanding was a requirement previously, until it would appear that it was realised that other people couldn't meet it, and that requirement was downgraded to BREEAM Excellent in round 2. We talk about saving money, sir. We talk about saving money a lot, but we should have been building, we should almost have this office built on the International Finance Centre now. People say delay and we must just get on, and those are the arguments we had around the selection of the hospital site. But sir, I say to members, saying we've just got to get on is not a good enough reason for making decisions like this to proceed. Saying don't delay, we've just got to get on is not good enough. And then I get to the crux of my argument on this site, sir, and that's around housing. The housing minister said yesterday that he liked the plans, and I have to agree with him. The design that we've seen for this office development next to the parade looks very nice. And he says that the housing minister said it was a better use of the footprint, and I agree, but I don't think he goes far enough, because I think we need to make even better use of this footprint at Cyril Le Marcourt House. And that is to make better use of it as an accommodation site for housing or whatever. We'd always expect that this building would be either reinvented or rebuilt for people who really need it in our essential services: doctors, nurses, consultants, other healthcare workers, teachers, those people who we desperately want to get onto the island, but at the moment struggle because the quality of accommodation we offer them is quite appalling. So we have an approved office site at the waterfront. Let's use it. We also desperately need housing. And let's use the Cyril Le Marcourt site for that. We can't afford to build offices on a site that would be ideally suited to try to help with the thousands and thousands of units of accommodation that we need to build in the next few years. So Senator Mesic was absolutely right when he used the words bad smell yesterday, and I can't but not help but agree with him, because something just doesn't smell right to me here. If we didn't want to use the JDC, what are we doing? Why aren't we, you know, how do you think they feel when we select a third-party developer to build for us when we have our own development company? The profits from the JDC are used to invigorate other areas, to move on to the next site. the profits from what we are being proposed today will stay in a third party's bank account. How can that be right? In conclusion, we're saying, Assembly, that we're committed to the environment and we've declared a climate emergency, yet we're not going for the best environmental option. We say to our staff yesterday how we want better offices for our staff to work in, and I quite agree. But we're not going to put them in the best building. We say we're people of Jersey who desperately, desperately need housing. But we're going to build an office on a site which would be far better suited to accommodation. Sir, I urge members to support this proposition today, to seek clarity, to seek more information, and to not act hastily. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. And I'm very pleased to follow Deputy Luce. We may not agree on everything politically, but I think what this shows is that the concerns that surround this project go across the Assembly. They go across parties, they go across political beliefs, because there are genuine concerns. And I want to start by just reminding everyone that this proposition is about giving time to undertake effective scrutiny. And that is the crux of the argument. The response from government seems to not be one of looking at the project itself and its value, as much as trying to put a barrier between scrutiny and government, which I think is unhealthy. It doesn't need to be there, and the opposite needs to happen. The enabling of a scrutiny process on this project is vital, and it is vital for a number of specific reasons. And the most obvious of those reasons is that this is an extremely long-term project. The deal is a strange one, and trying to explain it is not easy. I'll use ballpark figures because really that's all we've got. So we're saying we will give a piece of owned Jersey land, an asset of the government, of the states, of the people of Jersey, to a private developer who will build on it. And then we will rent for 4 years at around £4 million a year. That gives us £16 million spent already. And at the end of that, we have the option to buy, which is around £88 million or something like that. And if we don't buy, then we enter into a 22-year lease of around £4 million a year. So that's circa 4 million. So that's about, what, 22 times 4 is £44 million. No, it's more than that, isn't it? Of course, it's £88 million. Of course, what a similar figure that is, £88 million. And at the end of that 22 years, we seem to then say, well, if we don't want it, it goes back to you for a 77-year lease and you can do whatever you want with it. So this is a deal which needs to be looked at in detail by scrutiny. It needs the effect of this over the long term, the implications in terms of what happens during those assemblies, which will be very different. We do not know who will be in charge of the project during the time that these things happen, and so that uncertainty needs to be dealt with now. The other issue that we have over these long-term contracts is the detail. And Senator Ferguson said yesterday that we don't have the detail, so she seemed to suggest that these things won't happen, like PFI deals in the UK. But so I would suggest to Senator Ferguson that this is exactly the issue why this scrutiny needs to happen, because we don't have the detail on who's responsible for repairs, who's responsible if the building itself is not up to standard, who's responsible for the snagging lists. And as somebody who moved into a brand new school during my career, I can tell you now that those snagging lists get longer and longer every day as you work in a building. And we must understand the long-term contract and what it means for the Jersey taxpayer. We seem to have taken an asset, as was said before, and it could be turned into a long-term liability. Now, sir, the only way that we can really address that issue is to undertake the scrutiny that is referred to in this proposition. And most importantly, at the end of that proposition, it suggests that a debate on the proposition lodged by the Minister subsequent to the presentation of the scrutiny report that provides for agreement or otherwise of the States Assembly to proceed with the land transaction. So we are committing the States Assembly and the people of Jersey to a 99-year deal. If we are not certain as to why and what we are doing, then so we should not be allowing that to happen. So I would ask the Chief Minister and I would ask the government to accept this proposition, to say, actually, we can allow this level of scrutiny to happen because it can be constructive and it must happen if there is to be certainty in the Assembly amongst other people as well. And we've not had that certainty, so, and these things have already been mentioned. So about the Broad Street, the sudden change, what is a new project, not the second project, but a new project. That's why I asked a question yesterday. And if we look at what's happening today, even in the UK with Liverpool Council, there may be a stepping in over some of their contracts and deals that have happened. And so those are long term. Those happened a long time ago. And Jersey could be in a very similar situation if we are not certain as to what is happening. And so the issue over the finance centre and the Jersey Development Corporation, I think, is a very real one, and that relationship needs to be addressed in a longer term strategy that this addresses. So I have serious concerns over this project. A number of members have serious concerns over this project. I would say to the Constable of St Helier, are you certain that in the long term this is the right type of project for the centre of St Helier? Because in 22 years' time, that building could go back to the developers and could become absolutely anything, because we have no control over that. We are writing that control away. And so finally, if we are not certain in the long term as to what's happening to Jersey assets, to buildings that we use, then we should not be making decisions on them now, where future assemblies, future generations and future taxpayers may be paying a bill that we have taken responsibility for without the adequate level of information. So I'll finish by saying, I know we've had this issue over the hospital. I believe there is one big difference for the hospital, which is the debate over that for me is that that is a space which can be expanded into and is a very different situation, a necessity way beyond office blocks. And so, sorry, there is one other thing I will mention. The long-term nature of this contract has to take into effect the pandemic and the changing work patterns, the effects of Brexit, so that people may actually be based in Jersey but not working in Jersey, employing people from abroad on contracts where they're not situated here has become much more possible because of the effects of the pandemic and the changes to working. And long term, sir, unless we understand the implications, we could be left with what is a huge white elephant in the centre of St Helier, with future generations wondering how on earth this decision was made. So I urge members to support P18 and let's go through a proper scrutiny process before we move forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy of St Peter.
Thank you, sir. I suppose having the benefit of a journey overnight means I could consolidate my thoughts on yesterday's proceedings. It appears there have been some misunderstandings on the part of several of those that spoke in favour of the proposition. I would therefore like to offer my understanding on the principal matters discussed yesterday and hopefully correct some of them so we can all agree to finally move forward with this project, which, lest we forget, had its roots laid some 15 years ago. So the importance of this matter in hand is massive. The risks of cancelling or curtailed procurement are significant, with potentially £1 million of costs expended being aborted without an award, effectively dead and wasted public money. The risks of delaying the award are also significant, with costs of £1 million for each month of delay in delivering this long-awaited part of the estate rationalisation. The first misunderstanding I shall correct is the procurement process. The procurement has been operated to accord with the requirements of the Public Finances Manual and the approved procurement strategy. The procurement states and the selection and award criteria on which basis the final development partner will be appointed were published to all organisations at the outset. All changes to the procurement were made in accordance with the agreed project governance. Secondly, the government has always anticipated there would need to include within the rules of this procurement competitive process measures that kept the competitive tension between the government and the final preferred bidder alive after the point that the final bidder had been confirmed. Therefore, within the procurement process confirmation and being issued to the bidders, the government reserved its right to withdraw an award to the preferred development partner and award to the reserve bidder in the event that the development partner either withdrew from the process, receiving the award decision letter, or attempted to make material modifications to essential aspects of its final tender. This last point is exactly what in fact happened, and to the credit of the government, they have ensured that the previous 12-month procurement was not lost, avoiding wasting the £1 million that was allocated for the procurement within the government plan 21-24. This is standard procurement procedure and put in place to mitigate foreseeable risks. This is why the government is in this position and proposes to award the contract to the reserve development partner whose solution meets the government requirements, is affordable, and again, in fact, represents excellent value for money against the present market rates for alternative proposals received, and can be delivered within 3 years of us signing the contract. Thirdly, sir, the Controller and Auditor General herself, in her report issued to the government on operation of land and buildings dated June 18, I seem to recall, criticised the government for their lack of action with rationalising the estate, when she stated, "I'm concerned, for example, that the proposal for a new fit-for-purpose main office building for the States, although backed by a compelling business case, took too long to develop and have stalls due to a lack of an agreement on funding. There is no single reason why the benefits anticipated from changing the way in which property is managed were not fully realised." Fourthly, some misunderstandings on the finances. We are not selling the site. We are not committing at this stage to buy or spend 90 to 100 million pounds, whatever. We are, however, committing at the stage to lease the building for 25 years with an option to buy the building within the first 3 years. Even if we only stick with the lease option, we will pay a little more than we presently pay for rent, but will save significant sums of money by reducing the size of the existing office estate by circa 45%. In addition, we will release over 10 brownfield sites and realise productivity savings in a new fit-for-purpose headquarters. Any decision to make the commitment to purchase would require a separate business case, a separate governance process to the board, political oversight group, council, ministers, scrutiny and members, and would be subject to a separate decision, either through the government plan or subject to a further Standing Order 168. Finally, sir, perhaps the biggest misunderstanding made by several colleagues that spoke in favour of the proposal yesterday. The decision before the Assembly today is one of risk transfer. We are ready to sign a deal with a competitively procured, vastly experienced and capable development partner. The minute we sign, sir, the risk of design will be passed to the development partner. The risk of obtaining planning approvals will be passed to the development partner. The risk of constructing the building will be passed to the development partner. The risk of finishing the building will be passed to the development partner. The risk of delivering on time will be passed to the development partner. The risk of delivering in budget will be passed to the development partner. So long as these debates about what next, what if and why continue, the risks shall always remain with the public. We have a fixed option purchase price agreed for acceptance at our discretion any time over the first 3 years, effectively giving the government up to 6 years before outlaying the capital sum. Alternatively, we have a fixed rent agreed, inclusive of all the costs of building and furnishing the building, which will be benchmarked for up to 25 years if we require. So, sir, in conclusion, I'd like to reiterate the point that my colleague, the Constable of St Helen, made when speaking yesterday. Nothing that has been presented in this proposition has convinced me or should convince my colleagues to walk away from getting on with delivering the project. In my view, further delay and prevarication sends a message that we struggle implementing major strategic decisions. This proposition would do nothing to enhance this Assembly's reputation in the eyes of those we serve. I urge members to allow this project to continue without further delay and deliver the government HQ that we so desperately need. And I say, let's just get on with it.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Senator Moore, you have a question for the Attorney General.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir, I would like to ask the Attorney General whether he could rule as to whether members of the Planning Committee may have a conflict of interest, as the Environment Minister declared that he perceived he did yesterday. It rather surprised me to hear the Deputy of St Peter referring to planning issues when he is himself a member of that committee.
I'm afraid, I don't think that's a matter of legal advice for the Attorney General. A matter of conflict of interest is a matter between the Assembly and arguably the presiding officer. And this is calling a matter in or pushing it forward, and I don't think it was a matter for the Deputy Young whether he wished to recuse himself, and he did. But there is nothing to stop, I think, other members of the planning panel, if they feel that they wish to contribute to the debate and vote, for continuing to do so. I don't think that they have a conflict of interest as such, because there's no decision for them that they will or will not be making.
I'm grateful to you, advice. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Colin Tarbison-Saviour.
Yes, sorry. Deputy Ward wanted a question as well to the AG.
I apologise, Deputy Ward.
That's all right, Madam.
Thanks, sir. Sorry, thank you. Don't interrupt you, Constable St Saviour there. I wouldn't want to do that. So I was just going to ask the Attorney General after the Deputy Hewlin's speech regards the legal position of handing on the risk for large projects and what the government's position is in terms of implementing those the legal position regards that risk, because this seems to be very pivotal in this debate, that we can in some way pass on the risk to someone else and just wash our hands of it. But what is the government's legal position and what legal right do we have, and how do we get the redress for that situation? There's a terrible echo, by the way, sir.
Yes, there is a bad echo, but I think we were able to hear you. Perhaps someone has their microphone on who doesn't need to, or their Mr. Attorney, are you able to give assistance to the Assembly on the transfer of risk that's been mentioned in debate?
Sir, in general terms, yes. I think it is entirely a matter to be dealt with in the relevant contract. So the terms of the contract would provide that in the event of an overrun of the project or an overrun of costs, then, for example, one of the parties to the contract bear the consequences of that. So I think beyond that general statement, well, it's to be dealt with in the contract. I don't think I can assist further because I'm not cited on the particular terms of these contracts involved.
So I wonder if I may just briefly rephrase the question, because that's a very useful answer, because I think I was asking slightly something different. I've just realised that. And the question is to the Attorney General, in a long-term contract such as this, if the company who takes on that risk either ceases to trade or changes legally their position, does that risk continue, and how can that risk legally be traced, if you like? I don't know what the word is, or tracked. Is there a position where, in law, where that contract would be so binding as to, or is it with just one particular company at one particular time? It's the long-term nature of legalizing these risks that I'm concerned about. So
is it the question, and excuse me for paraphrasing,
no, please
whether the transfer of risk survives the successors to the company in question, or its administrators or receivers should it become bankrupt?
Yes, that's a good way of putting it, sir. Thank you for that. Yes.
Well, that was helpful. Does that assist you, Mr. Attorney?
Yes, sir. There will be, well, to start with, I'm sure there will be various contractual mechanisms which can be put in place to try and alleviate the risk of one party entering into insolvency. So, for example, some escrow monies can be set aside, insurance arrangements might be put in place. But as regards if one of the parties were to enter a liquidation, then in normal circumstances, unless there is security taken, then the counterparty with a claim under the contract is an unsecured creditor and would just rank quite low down the list in the company's liquidation, or if it was dealt with by way of days asked. So that this is quite a large area of law. There are also various potential claims against the directors of the company in certain circumstances, if it could be established that they had wrongfully or caused the company to wrongfully or fraudulently trade. There are a number of remedies that are available. None of them are particularly straightforward, but this is quite a large area of law. But I hope that assists the deputy in summary form.
Yes, thank you, sir. That's very useful indeed. Thank you.
Indeed. Yes, now it's your chance, Conrad Harbison Saviour.
Thank you, sir. I was very disappointed with what was going on yesterday, because I would have liked the scrutiny to be allowed to do their job. People are saying that officers as we knew them now will no longer be in use. They will no longer exist. And I was disappointed with Deputy Labby's attitude. He was so excited that we were going to borrow money, and this was a very good time to borrow money. We must come down to earth. This cavalier attitude that we are adopting in this government has to stop. We are borrowing money to have a wonderful larger-than-life hospital. We are borrowing money to have a larger-than-life office building. We are borrowing money for a larger-than-life sports facilities on this island. This gung-ho attitude cannot continue. I've got 5 great-grandchildren, and I worry for them, because I think when they're younger than me, but when they are at a working age, they will still be paying for facilities that this government has approved. And I just think that is completely wrong. Please, let's stop this cavalier attitude. Let scrutiny do their job. Let's go through this, because this is not ringing true. And none of what we are doing is ringing true. To have interest at a very low rate is a good time to borrow money, possibly, but not for this government. This is ridiculous. We are borrowing money left, right and centre, and we are going to have to repay it. And I just think this is completely wrong, and I am very, very sorry. Thank you very much, sir.
Deputy Taddy.
Thank you, sir. Just to bring this back to the wording of the proposition in front of us, and reading through it, before I get into any of the complexities and detail of what's being proposed by government for this project, is simply to say that I think that any fair-minded, impartial person reading the wording of the scrutiny proposition would be struck by how reasonable it is, and it would be strange if states members acting in the best interest of the islands didn't adopt it, irrespective of what their final position and the state's final decision on the actual nature of the project might be. And the reason I say that is simply because it is allowing scrutiny to do its job. Is this a controversial project? Clearly it is a controversial project. Are there several ways in which this project, if desirable, could be delivered? Yes, that is also the case. And is there a monopoly on the idea of the best way to do that and deliver that? And the answer is no. There are several ways in which this could be delivered. And what is the purpose of scrutiny? How do we know whether the government of the day is doing the right thing? And beyond the usual political differences, ideological differences, how do we objectively determine whether a particular path forward is correct? We use the mechanism that we have as an assembly, which is the scrutiny function, to do that. And scrutiny needs to have the time and it needs to have the information that they're seeking in order to put a project like this through its proper scrutiny. If they don't do that, and if we don't let them do that, irrespective of where we are in the assembly on scrutiny as a backbencher or as a minister, then we're doing a disservice not just to our system and our assembly, but to the whole of the island. And that is what the proposition is asking us to do, parts 1, 2 and 3. So all of those requests are not just entirely reasonable, but it would be actually reckless if we didn't allow scrutiny to do that job. Now, looking at some of the merits of the project before us, I was struck by the previous speaker, or before the CONETAB, Deputy Hewlin, was talking about risk, and it's all going to be assumed by the private sector. That's strange, isn't it, that the private sector wants to take so much risk? Why do they want to take so much risk? And you have to ask them, what are the costs and the other benefits involved? And what are the benefits to government and to the public if we don't go with what the government's proposing here? And it seems to me that there are so many questions that remain unanswered, not least the fact that irrespective of what we think of the Jersey Development Company, we have the Jersey Development Company. And I remember this saying, which was one I probably didn't understand when I was a young politician, that you don't have a dog and bark. And I think I know what that means now. And the whole point is that if we have set up specifically a body which does building projects on behalf of the government of Jersey, on behalf of the states of Jersey, then why are we not using them? Are we saying that we don't trust them to deliver a project of this nature? Why is it that we would automatically go out to the private sector, to one of our competitors, if you like, to build something for us when we have our own company? Surely that's a slap in the face for the body that we have already established for a specific purpose of delivering that kind of project. And I'm not an expert when it comes to property development. I've never claimed to have been, but I do take an interest more generally in philosophy. And something that has come to my mind is the 14th century philosopher William of Ockham. And although I may be stretching exactly what he said, essentially he looked at problem solving. And he said that when you look at a problem, you should tend to look for the most simple solution, and it's usually the case that the most simple explanation of a problem is the correct one. And similarly, if you're trying to solve a problem, or in our case, if you're trying to build a building, which is essentially what we're trying to do, take it back to its most simplest form. And when a solution is proposed that is overly complicated, then you're right to be suspicious of it. You're right to be questioning of it, because it's always, the more detail there is, the more scope there is for something to go wrong. And I look at it simplistically like this. We own a piece of land. We have a building which exists, and we want to make the building into something else, either by knocking it down or redeveloping it. And we want to use that building, and we want to put our staff in it. Now, if we owned a piece of land in our private lives, what would we do? If we had the capability of building a house there ourselves for us to live in, we would just do it ourselves. If we didn't have the expertise to build the house, we would get a friend or a company to do it. But if we owned a company that built houses, we'd probably get the company that built houses to build our house for us, and then we'd live in that house. And then if we didn't want to live in the house anymore, we'd sell the house. Or if we decided that we didn't want to live in the house for a couple of years, we could rent the house out, somebody else could live in the house, and we could go and live somewhere else in the island or move abroad. That's what you would do. You wouldn't come up with a contrived policy where you say, well, actually, let's get somebody else to build a house for us because they're going to take the risk. And what is all this talk of risk? I mean, we know that if you ask a company to build a house for you, your own company, or you do it yourself, it will be built. You build it, and then you live in it, you occupy it. So I'm sorry if that's oversimplistic, but that has to be the starting point. And of course, there might be other considerations, but that's what it boils down to. It's not that as if the government doesn't have money. It's not as if the government doesn't have a revenue stream to pay for things that are in the public interest and of public benefit. We have that. You know, it's not like somebody who doesn't have any access to a deposit or funds and therefore needs to go to somebody to in the private sector to loan them or build them something which ultimately they can't afford. So I would like to, and I'd like to hear what scrutiny have to say, having looked at it. And again, if we're saying we don't want scrutiny to look at it, again, it seems to suggest that we don't have confidence in our scrutiny function and our scrutiny people. And if that's the case, that's really unfortunate. But I've not heard anyone overtly say that's the case. So I think we need to let scrutiny do its job. I think we have a right, irrespective of where we sit in this assembly, to make sure that the decisions we make are not done on the hoof, are not rushed, but are the correct ones for our island, especially when they result in potentially decades of potential paying off of those assets that we build for the public. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy. The Deputy Trinity. Deputy Trinity. Very well. Deputy Truscott.
Yes, thank you, sir. This is a very interesting one, and I've been listening to obviously both sides of the argument. I've got to declare, I mean, right from day one, I've been very keen to progress this particular project. I think it makes so much sense to have a one government under one roof, where it's a one-stop shop for public services. It makes total sense, and I've been asking questions ever since I became a member back in 2014, trying to push this along. So I'm delighted to finally see that it's to this stage. Life's all about timing, and one could argue that the timing isn't particularly great at the moment. What with post-Brexit, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Our finances are somewhat stretched. We don't know what the future brings, and I can understand there's a great deal of concern at the degree of borrowing that this government is considering. I do hope when the Chief Minister speaks that he will address, and I've heard this for the second time, a figure of £250 million being proposed on spending on 4 regions. That is eye-watering and quite staggering. And obviously we're all aware of the hospital and the cost of that, and £100 million being proposed on this portion, which is, let's face it, going to be over 10 years. Nevertheless, it's still £100 million. So I can understand why the public are concerned, and the Constables of St Saviour's absolutely right. It's future generations. They're going to have to pay for this, and that I am so aware of, and as I'm sure we all are. It's what I find so compelling about the argument proposed by the proposition, the main proposition, is the 11 points made, and they're very alluring. We go down from 21 buildings to 8, for example. There's an operational saving of 6.8 million per annum. I mean, over 10 years, 68 million pounds saved in just efficiencies. So, that goes well towards paying for the projects in the first place. We talk about coming down from 21 to 8. Well, that will free up Philip Lefevre House, for example, in Lamott Street. That will go to housing. We've already heard that South Hill will be going to housing. With regard to the International Finance Centre, frankly, I think that should be full of companies that have financial-based businesses. I think Cyril Markle is a good site and will bring regeneration in the area, which is much needed. As you say, I'll continue. The panel did suggest be pushing some economic stimulus.
I'm afraid you seem to be breaking up, Deputy Truscott. We can't hear you.
I do apologise. Am I still breaking up?
No, you're clearer now.
Okay. Yes, the fiscal policy panel, sir, did suggest that we push some economic levers, stimulus levers in the short term. And I think this will make an excellent project to keep the economy going. So all in all, I'm pretty much in favour of pressing the button to launch this, and I won't be quite likely supporting the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Very much indeed. We can go back to the Deputy of Trinity. Are you now able to speak to us, Deputy?
I think that is the case, sir. It is. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sir, can I just ask one question? There was a point raised by the Deputy of St Mary's with regards to conflict and the fact that he sat on the One Government board that dealt with the beginning to the end of this particular question of the office accommodation. If I'm allowed to speak, am I? And not, I'm not conflicted by the fact that I sat on that board.
No, this is not a matter of conflict. This is a matter that board you sat on, and this has now been brought before the Assembly, and there's no reason to exclude yourself, Deputy of Trinity.
Thank you, sir. I'm probably going to come from a totally different viewpoint with regards to what has been said. I've listened to many debates in this Assembly, and I must say I found yesterday's afternoon and this morning's somewhat frustrating, and I'd have to say that's an understatement. I recognise that some in this chamber obviously have far more experience of debating than others. I recognise and respect that we have differing views with regards to politicals, to our political units, although we've all been voted in to represent our parishioners or islanders. But what I cannot accept is the situation we now find ourselves in. As you know, I took over as Assistant Minister of 3 separate departments, all of which have major infrastructure issues. To be quite frank, our property portfolio is a disgrace. I've never seen such a mess. Buildings not used that have been laid empty for years, and I'm talking in terms of some buildings longer than 20 years, and nothing's been spent on them. This is not a problem that's just occurred recently. This has been going on. Let's face it, just like any property, whether it's your own home, whether it's state properties that we look after on behalf of the public, if you don't look after them, they fall into disrepair, and you only have to look around this island. I would further ask, with the comments that are made within this Assembly over the last 24 hours, the vast experience all of you have in dealing with contracts of such nature. I don't think there's very many of us in this Assembly that have dealt with £100 million contracts. In fact, I think there's very few that have dealt with £1 million contracts. I can assure you that it is the same now as it has been for many years, whether you're buying a house or dealing with state's properties. When I was in the UK, I can honestly say that I was part of a large funding organisation that dealt with large commercial building companies wanting to build houses, shopping centres, and yes, sporting facilities, which I might mention later on. When I was involved in borough or county council negotiations, the secret was not to let tenderers or developers or vendors know the cost of the deal you were negotiating with others. Why? Because you wanted the best outcome, the best deal for your client, and in this case, the best deal for the Jersey taxpayers. So when I was asked to join the One Government group concerning the development of new offices, I felt I had something to offer. But then I saw life repeating itself, that what I had done before, except for one thing, the one area which I still can't get my head around at the moment, and that's public scrutiny. I fully understand the need for scrutiny and accept that it's part of the fabric of political Jersey. But there are occasions, and this was one of them, when negotiations had to remain behind closed doors until the deal was ready to be struck. As I said before, the secret was not to let others know the cost of the deal you were negotiating. I would add that this should also be the case when we come to negotiate funding for other developments like the hospital and Fort Regent. And I will just say one thing on Fort Regent. I think the media has got the wording wrong and they've completely misunderstood what I've said. We've said that the cost of 100 million to be spent on Fort Regent is over 10 years, but I didn't say that it was all going to be states' money. So I think there's confusion there. But we must look at every large development that Jersey undertakes in future because it's so important to the island. I went to the first One Government Committee meeting and was absolutely staggered that the discussions concerning our accommodation for our staff had been going back since 2005. I was brought up to date with what had been discussed previously. At the beginning of 2020, the One Government Committee was given all details of the ideas and suggestions that were being put forward for the new States Office accommodation. As the year progressed, the debates obviously became more detailed. And to get the best deal for the states, it was vitally important, as I said earlier, that negotiations were kept confidential. We had problems. We had people making offers, then they withdrew the offers. You are getting to get that situation now. Obviously, I can only speak for myself, but I do believe that all those on that OneGov board, and I would have to say most of them, and in fact all of them, were on they all realized it was such a sensitive nature, and that until we had everything to hand, it was not possible to share anything in the public domain. We did, of course, advise and brief scrutiny of what was going on, as laid in the comments, and provided some amounts of documentation. Many questions were asked, we hid nothing, and the team of the OneGov board asked every possible question under the sun. Therefore, in conclusion, I have to say that I will not be voting for this proposition, as I believe that following all the previous negotiations and having seen all the paperwork, that the deal now being presented is a good one for the states of Jersey and its taxpayers. I will, however, leave you with one comment, and that was made by Deputy Gardner yesterday, that an overhaul of our properties and future developments must be undertaken immediately. Otherwise, these debates will just go on forever. Nothing will be done, and properties will fall into further disrepair. And that is the risk we face today. And I'll just remind you of one thing. 1988 was the first time that we had an inquiry about what we should do with Fort Regent. 32 years later, we still haven't decided. It's appalling. We've got to change this approach, and all of us have to change this approach, all 49, not just one, all 49. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. The Constable St Martin.
Thank you, sir. I will admit I was sitting on the fence on this and have had a real dilemma. I do believe we need to get on with this project, we really do, but not at the expense of proper scrutiny. This is a reasonable proposition. Having slept on it and done some more research, I will be voting for this proposition, as I cannot in a clear conscience vote against it. There are still so many unanswered questions, things that just don't add up. In closing, I would also like to add that I'm irritated by the continual stance of government, that those of us not in the government do not understand. I'd like to say to them, yes, we do understand, and that is why I'll be voting for this proposition. Thank you.
Right, going to our Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Let me just, I think it was an appropriate time to come in, sir, because hopefully I can help give some clarity on comments made by certain members. It has been an interesting debate so far, sir, and fairly obviously it won't be a surprise to members, particularly following the comments circulated that I'm speaking today in opposition to this proposition, which in our view threatens a serious delay in an essential project. And so, sorry, I'm just checking my time. A reduction in the number of office properties occupied by the government has been a principle discussed since even before the ministerial system was adopted. It's been a policy included in the 2007 States of Jersey Annual Business Plan and the 2013 MTFP. It's been a strategy adopted by 2 successive governments, and now, after more than a decade and a half of work, it is a project that is close to realisation, and that, by that, sir, I mean a matter of days. Reducing our office estate has a number of benefits, which I know members are familiar with, but however, I think it's prudent to reiterate again some of those benefits now, again for the benefit of this debate. So this project would reduce the government's office estate by more than 45%, from over 385,000 square feet today to 215,000 square feet. Doing so will free up much needed space, primarily in St Helier, for housing. This will reduce both the government's literal footprint in town and our carbon footprint, sir, with a smaller office built to higher environmental standards, helping us to meet our environmental commitments. It will allow for annual revenue savings of around £7 million a year. The latent productivity benefits are far harder to quantify, but they're no less real. And in addition, delivery of services will be enhanced, achieving government synergy as well as capital receipts, and also releasing brownfield sites. And that will provide, and it's been alluded to already, sir, a vital stimulus to our local construction industry and provide employment for hundreds of islanders at precisely the time when we need to rebuild our economy following the impacts of COVID-19. And sir, that excludes the further projects that will occur later on the newly freed up sites that the government will vacate as part of this move. So this project really does have the potential to unlock the issues surrounding our estate. And we all know how critical it is to get more housing sites into this pipeline. And I repeat, this scheme unlocks the sites that we own. But the office project is about more than just financial good sense. It will also improve islanders' access to government services, enhancing their interaction with government and ensuring services are delivered efficiently. And as has also been referred to, sir, locating at Cyril and Markham House will lock in regeneration at the bottom end of the precinct, and with this particular location, it's actually not that far to Halkett Place and then the markets. Finally, the new office will improve facilities for staff, supporting their well-being, and that includes significantly improving things like ventilation and air conditioning in a post-pandemic world, to say nothing of economic improvements which we can make for staff. And for example, that means having desks that you can stand at, for example. So this project is therefore not only positive from an economic perspective, but also from a personnel one. It will reduce costs and raise standards, improving both our delivery of services and our facilities for staff, all while securing an overall saving to the taxpayer. And so doing nothing is not an option. Inaction would cost significantly more. And I'll say it again, I'll say it further down in my speech, sir. Our calculations are that doing nothing compared to this project would cost in the order of £30 million more. So making a choice to not do this project means making a choice that you want to spend £30 million more on a decaying estate. So, and that's, so basically, sir, inaction costs more, and that's also, sir, from the missed savings. And as I've said, sir, from rising maintenance costs across an unnecessarily large and ageing estate. And as the Deputy Trinity has very eloquently put, sir, it's an estate which has suffered from underinvestment over a number of years. And I fully appreciate and understand the Commentables and Saviour's comments, but this is actually about future generations, and it's not a cavalier attitude. Moving, and also, sir, to address a comment, I think, from the Deputy Martin, sir, moving out of Cyril and Markham when we did was actually forward-looking. It's given us the flexibility to include that site as a scheme, and wherever we were, sorry, sir, if we were going to rebuild Cyril and Markham in any shape or form for officers or any other site that we occupied, we would have to move out of it to build on it. And so what we're doing, sir, we've moved out in advance. It was one of the sites that came in, we know how we've got there. I'll cover that later in my speech as well. But it means that we are in a position to go, rather than having a position to agree in principle and then wait, for the sake of argument, a year or whatever it is to find another location and then to move out. And so also, if we do nothing, it removes the otherwise significant potential for new brownfield sites suitable for affordable housing. It missed the potential of getting them into that pipeline. It will mean missed savings and missed opportunity for real investment into service of islanders and facilities for government staff, and it could mean jeopardising the current project. Now, sir, it's been claimed that this has all taken some members by surprise. And the Council Ministers approved what we call the Strategic Outline Business Case, I'll call that the SOC, sir, for this project in September 2019. This was provided to scrutiny in November 2019 in the form of a full private briefing with a detailed slide deck on the SOC and the project. The full 140-page hard copy of the SOC was issued to scrutiny on, I believe, the 17th of December 2019. PAC received a private briefing on the estate strategy and office accommodation project in January 2020. They received a further briefing on the impact of COVID-19 on both the estate strategy and the office accommodation project in June 2020. And CSSP received a private briefing updating them on the progress of the project in July 2020 and again in October. So there has been regular engagement in panels over the past 15 months or so, and hundreds of pages of documents provided. Let's also be clear, the office accommodation project forms an important part of each of the last two government plans. And sir, and I will just allude to it, sir, in the Assembly I'd hold this up and be waving it around. This is the extract from my records of what was in the government plan, sir, that the Assembly approved in 2019, sir. It's the government plan 2020 to 2023. And it states, we will bring forward and invest in a new office facility that can accommodate the government's long-term needs. On another page, so it refers to this as an action point. The primary strategy is to bring forward and invest in a new office facility that can accommodate the Government of Jersey's needs. Separately, the One Government Office Modernisation Project, which will consolidate our office estate into a single administrative headquarters where all non-frontline colleagues will work. This will facilitate more cost-effective use of accommodation, release sites for redevelopment for alternative uses, including housing, and promote better teamwork and collaboration across functions and departments. These projects are transformational. They will address long-standing deficiencies in the public estate and reshape the delivery of services to islanders and other service users. And so actually, those projects that were listed include the Office Modernisation Strategy, Fort Regent, Island Sports Facilities, the IT infrastructure. It was a recognition that we were setting out a plan, a long-term plan, to start dealing with a lot of the underinvestment that, as we've heard so many times, that we needed to do into our estate and our infrastructure. And again, under the Office Modernisation Strategy, it states the office environments are outdated based on a variety of cellular spaces and standard desk types. While some have been configured as open plan spaces, this is not the norm, and there are limited other work settings to choose from across the estate. This does not support the ways of working that departments need in a modern collaborative government. And so in the government plan that we approved last year, it specifically states, in last year's government plan, we outlined our proposals to bring forward a new office for states and government employees. And this bit, sir, is important in terms of the timing and the notification. In 2021, we will finalise the contractual arrangements for the development of the new office arrangements, the final detail of which is due to be completed by November 2020. So that is what we as members approve, sir. The Council Ministers is recommending that we initially lease the proposed new facility from 2023 with the option to purchase the building by 2026 when further information is available about Jersey's economic landscape. And so that is actually what we are debating today. It carries on later in the plan that we've reviewed the principles of the SOC to assess the implications of the pandemic on the project. We continue to consider the case to build a new office as being valid. And so just to touch separately, very, very briefly, as Deputy Truscott raised the comment about Fort Regent, what we are not doing with Fort Regent is committing to huge sums of money at this stage, sir. that fairly obviously would have to be an Assembly decision. What we have done, and is in the government plan, is there are relatively small sums of money, sir. I think it's between 5 and 8 million roughly, which is in the capital programme and other parts of the spend. Maybe some small sums in fiscal stimulus, sir, and that's all about in terms of small scale projects, about placemaking, about, for example, putting the gardens back into a good state, whilst we start working out how to address all the legacy bits, including Legionella, present fire safety standards, and actually the sheer lack of investment into that building for a very, very long time. It's about putting the soul back into Fort Regent, and I think the Deputy Trinity made reference to how long that's been going on for. So, sir, we are not committing to the significant sums that have been bounded around. What we are saying is we need to have a long-term strategy. This is starting to set the foundations on that. I'm going to go back, sir, to the final comment in the government plan on the office strategy. It will enable the public service to more effectively discharge its duties to support ministers, the States Assembly and the public it serves. It will also improve the efficiency and effectiveness of operational costs that support the public estate, as well as enhance productivity savings, which will be fully articulated in the final business case. And as part, repeat, sir, as part of the 2021 government plan, we will finalise the contractual arrangements of the development of the new office arrangements, the final detail of which is due to be completed by November 2020. I believe, sir, the plan from memory was, I think, lodged in October, and sir, the detail that was agreed went to the political oversight group in the very first week of December, council ministers a week later, and then papers went to the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel on, I believe, the 15th of December. I think it is, and that is all laid out in the timeline in the comments, sir. I think what is important, sir, so sorry, just to wrap up on those dates, and then I'll make something that is quite important as well. The Council Ministers confirmed the selection of a preferred and reserved development partner on the 9th of December, subject to the approval of the government plan, which this Assembly gave on the 17th of December 2020. Now, so what is important to note, and again explains some of the queries that have been raised and have also been covered in briefings that we have given to members, is that the full business case, which was given to scrutiny in December 2020, and that's just about roughly over 3 months ago, sir, has both options contained in it, i.e. the figures for both schemes, the figures for what was referred to as bidder A and bidder C. And that is why we were able to switch so quickly from the preferred bidder to the reserve bidder. The work had already been done and shared with scrutiny in December of last year. So a clear process has been followed throughout this project, one that scrutiny have been familiarised with and kept abreast of. And more than 800 pages of evidence, briefing notes, slides and business cases have been provided since 2019. So sir, in my genuine opinion, the government has engaged with scrutiny significantly in this project over the last 15 months, and we would have been pleased to see a review take place. And indeed, sir, the minutes of CSSP on the 19th of November 2019 state that the panel agreed to defer consideration of any possible review work until it reviewed the SOBC, so the SOC, which it received on the 17th of December 2019, i.e. just a month after that meeting and more than 15 months ago. The panel then agreed to receive regular briefings from the Government of Jersey officers on progress with the project, and that is what has been happening. So we have kept principally the CSSP, but also other panels as well engaged during this whole time. And I think it is a great shame that the SLC did not raise their desire to review this earlier, because a significant delay at this late stage after 15 months will have huge consequences. If P18 is approved by the Assembly, given the requirement for a further debate, which is in the proposition, it is unlikely that the CC would return to the Assembly at least until July at best, and more likely in September, i.e. a delay of 4 to 6 months. And as outlined in the proposition, the final financial consequences identified in P18 2021 estimate the cost of any delay at approximately £1 million per month. Any protracted delay could mean that the procurement process could actually fail. And if this were to be the case, then further delay would be caused as the procurement process would need to be restarted. And this would have associated abortive and repeat costs. And it is likely there would also be other additional financial and reputational impacts to the government. And we have outlined those in slightly more detail so when we've done the briefings to members. So let's be very, very clear, sir. As I've stated on a number of occasions, and this is trying to address some of the remarks of members that members have raised during the debate, this is not a PFI contract, and I would not be supportive of it if it was. This is a turnkey solution, including with the provision of all of the furniture. We retain ownership, we retain control, and we hold our own destiny of the lease or a purchase of the building. Now, under the proposal, sir, as outlined by the Deputy St Peter, none of the risks lie with us. So I'll just refer again to what he outlined in his speech. The risk of design, the risk of obtaining planning approvals, the risk of constructing the building, the risk of finishing the building, the risk of delivering on time, and the risk of delivering in budget are all passed to the development partner. And in relation to comments surrounding SOJDC, and I need to split this, one lot I disassociate myself from as I found them somewhat distasteful. It was a very clear and transparent and competitive process. But just before I go further there, I was surprised by the comments of the Deputy St Martin, because he did actually turn down the offer of a one-to-one briefing. He could have asked all of those questions to his heart's content, as we have done with other members. We've always actually wanted BREEAM excellence, sir. We've never changed that requirement. And also, sir, just to address one of the points that the Deputy St Martin raised, where he was saying, why aren't we using basically SOJDC as a developer? Well, so the same question can be asked as to why we didn't use SOJDC to construct the Kennevis School or the police station, or any other of the developments we've done. The whole point here, sir, is this is about having open and transparent processes and competitive processes. I'm surprised that the Deputy and others doesn't recognise that, because otherwise we would only have one developer on the island, sir, for any government project, and to date that has never been the case. One of the principal reasons, to repeat again, sir, for one bid not making to the final round was that the size of the building being put forward was too small by around 20%. And let's also be clear, the scheme is not predicated on non-ministerial departments taking part, and that would not have affected the fact that the proposal I've just referred to and previously was too small for what we specified. Also, to remind members, on the final scheme, scrutiny was briefed on the 3rd of February. Bear in mind, the business case was provided to them approximately 1.5 months before. States members were briefed just under 2 weeks later, in advance, not after, of the MD being signed and then uploaded, and that's all in the timeline in the comments. Now, there are two specific comments, sir, made by the proposer that need commenting on for the purposes of this debate. Firstly, it was suggested that we were turning a public asset into a liability. I wholeheartedly disagree with that statement. If doing nothing is going to cost £30 million more than what we're proposing, I would submit that the proposer got this the wrong way around, that the estate is at present costing us £7 million a year more than it should, and that this cost of doing nothing means that the existing office estate is more of a liability than an asset, and that is what we want to rectify. And in short, sir, we are not seeking to spend £100 million. The decision that SLC wish us to defer is to lease the building, which operationally will save us £7 million a year. However, if I understood matters correctly, I think I did agree with the statement that there was a risk of leaving us with buildings that do not meet the needs of the community. Whilst I don't think this is what the proposer meant, I would entirely concur. If we do nothing, if we delay this project, then the risk will be much greater that we retain expensive, environmentally unfriendly buildings that do not meet the needs of the community, and that is not a legacy I want us as States members to pass on to the next Assembly or the next generation. And so, sir, this project has followed a clear procurement strategy and decision-making process, all of which have been approved and shared with scrutiny. This project has been identified on a whole number of different occasions over the past 14 to 15 months to scrutiny in this Assembly, and on a number of pages in 2 government plans with approval of funding to get us to this stage. And so, in concluding, I really want to briefly summarise again the benefits of this project. Doing nothing will cost us £30 million more than the cost of this project. Operational savings are just under £7 million a year, excluding productivity savings and excluding any capital receipts. It will release brownfield sites and it will have a positive regeneration impact on St Hare. And sir, I therefore urge the Assembly please to reject this proposition, to support the office accommodation project, to provide a stimulus to our economy, a saving to the taxpayer, an improvement to our environmental credentials and support for government employees. And thank you, sir.
Very much, Chief Minister. Senator Pallett.
Thanks, sir. Firstly, I just wanted to comment on my Progress Party colleague, Deputy Sir Martin's speech, a speech that I totally agree with. In fact, I wasn't actually going to speak this morning because I think he said most of what I wanted to say, but there was some things said this morning that I think do require comment. It was the Deputy St Peter's speech, I think, that rather than comforting me, actually provided, actually set alarm bells ringing, and really, I think, made my mind clear as to why we do need to have further scrutiny of the office strategy and what we're intending, or the path that we're intending to take. Virtually everything he said just said to me, that needs scrutinising, this needs scrutinising, that needs checking. Are those facts correct? And as much as I'm not a doom monger over this project, I'm not somebody that doesn't believe we have to do something in regards to a new office, because I think we do. And actually, the design of the new building in Union Street is something that I find quite attractive. But the fact of the matter is that for me, process should be followed, and scrutiny should be given the opportunity to look at the decisions that have been made and provide a report to this Assembly as to some of the things that have been said and some of the comments that have been made by government. Deputy St Peter made several comments. He said that procurement procedure followed. Well, I'd like to scrutinise that. Maybe that's true, but I want to check that that's the case. He used the phrase competitive tensions were kept alive during the process. Well, that may be the case, but I want to make sure that that's actually correct. In regards to the move from the second bidder, move from Broad Street to Union Street, material modifications were made to the tender, which meant the changes. Well, as part of corporate services, I'd like to look into that. I'd like to see what those changes were. Now, they may have been in documents, but that may be, but I think the issue is about when a scrutiny process should have started. I'm going to come on to that. The preferred bidder meets the government's requirements. Well, that's as may be. And again, there has to be a time that needs to be checked, that needs to be scrutinised. There is no doubt, and I don't think any of us will disagree, that like the CNAG, we all know we have to rationalise the estate. There's no argument in that. We keep getting preached at about that, but I think we all accept that. Changes to property management within the states has been dreadful over the last decades. We all accept that. We know that's got to improve. Savings by reducing the number of operational sites. That's as may be, and I think we all accept that. But the savings need to be scrutinised. This figure of 6.8 million seems to follow every single project around. And we need to be sure that that's actually correct, and actually the figures that we're being told are correct. You can only do that through a scrutiny process. One of the things that really surprised me, and I accept there's a risk in every project. I've worked in the building industry for a long time. Every building project's got risk. But passing risk on to a development partner with another long list of issues that are going to be passed to the development partner needs scrutinising. I don't understand totally what that means. And I'm sure there are other members that don't fully understand what that means. And by doing a full scrutiny process on this, and to be fair, the scrutiny panel are ready to go on this, is we don't need to walk away from this project. Nobody's saying that we're going to walk away from delivering this project. What we are saying is that we want to make sure it's the right deal, it's the right We're going in the right direction, and scrutiny should be given the time to do that. A comment was made, we're putting the reputation of this assembly at risk by not doing or not moving this forward. Well, actually turn that round. I think we're putting the reputation of this assembly at risk by not fully scrutinising this project now, before we go any further, and before any contract is signed, to ensure it's the right thing for the public and the taxpayer. Deputy Tadier used the word reckless. I wouldn't quite go as far as reckless to move forward, but I think it would be dangerous. I think it will be setting precedents around ignoring scrutiny that I don't think is acceptable. I've moved back into scrutiny very recently, but I've always respected the fact that scrutiny should be given the opportunity to carry out their reviews independently in a way that I think serves not only the Assembly but also serves the public. We are, in many respects, giving away a piece of real estate to a private developer for 99 years, but potentially going to lease it back for 25 years or potentially buy the building. But what happens if we lease it back for 25 years? The developer then gets that site for another 74 years. That's a huge financial incentive. Again, it needs some scrutiny. The issue is a lot of this is around when the scrutiny should have taken place, and I'm going to come on to that in a second. I just want to also move on to some things that Deputy Trinity said around confidentiality. Of course, there needs to be confidentiality when you are dealing with preferred bidders to a point. But we've got to remember this is taxpayers' money here. He said that he fully understands the need for scrutiny. My honest opinion is there are members in government at the moment that do not understand what the role of scrutiny actually means, and the respect that scrutiny should be given to carry out their reviews. He used the phrase "remain behind closed doors." Well, Assistant Minister, Ministers, I'm afraid you need to dream on, because these things are not going to stay behind closed doors. They need to be fully scrutinised. The public need to fully understand what's going on, and they need to understand the financial commitment that we are going to take if we go down the route of this office strategy. Scrutiny, respect for confidentiality. I'm going to say that again. Scrutiny, respect confidentiality, and they need to be briefed and they need to be respected for doing that. And if they need information, they should be given it, and they should also be given the time to carry out the necessary review. The Assistant Minister, Deputy Trinity, also mentioned Fort Regent, 32 years. Well, absolutely, it's a disgrace that buildings such as Fort Regent have not been refurbished or renewed or regenerated over that period of time. But what's happened in the last 3 years? Absolutely nothing as far as the public's concerned. People ask me all the time, what's happening with Fort Regent? They see nothing happening. So, yeah, we need to be careful about some of the comments we're making around action that's been taken recently. I'm now going to move on to when to scrutinise. For me, you scrutinise something when you've got all the information, and we're preached that time and time again that government's provided all the information to scrutiny. Well, if scrutiny had taken the decision to carry out its review, let's pick a date out of the list that's provided of December the 9th. So many things changed between December the 9th and the decision that government took on the 22nd of February to produce R19, the ministerial decision, that had they started a review on December the 9th, put their terms of reference forward, they'd have been moving the goalposts almost up to the day R19 was produced. And admittedly, a lot of the information was there, but the decision wasn't taken until, like I say, 22nd of February. So I think we need to have a little bit more respect for scrutiny, respect that they'll get the work done in the shortest possible time frame possible, so that the Assembly can decide whether this is the right route to go. For my part, within corporate services at the current time, I am not, like I say, a doom monger. I do want to see action, but I want to see action taken on the back of good evidence of the Assembly being having all the full facts in front of them and having an independent scrutiny process having taken place that can give us all comfort that this is the right route to go. If we've got ourselves into all sorts of tangles with contracts that are going to cost us and it's going to, unrealistically going to cost us over the next few months, then that in itself should be scrutinised. But we do need to carry out the scrutiny process, and I would urge members to allow scrutiny to do this piece of work, to make sure that what could potentially be a huge sum of money that public are going to invest in this office, this new office, and this strategy is the best possible deal for the public. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Senator Gurdiash.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to start with Deputy Ward's excellent point, where he said that we don't know the effect that COVID will have on working practices on the island. It's a very good point indeed. We can't know. We may see a return to normal. We may see more working from home. And as he alluded to, we may see more working from abroad. But that makes the taking out of a lease rather than the wholesale purchase of a building all the more sensible. Because over that period of time, we will be able to see where the land lies and the direction of travel. So last week, when the new sports plan was unveiled, it was remarked upon by one of the attendees that it was nice to see something actually happening at last. It was a nice positive statement, sir. It was also, sir, an incorrect observation, because it was merely a plan. And until we see a JCB drive into view, it will remain merely a plan. And like so many of our plans, it will have things put in its way. Obstacles will appear, will hove into view very quickly. After that meeting, so many people were saying it went very well, and we received positive statements like the one I have just alluded to. I remarked to the person who made that comment to me, I said, give it 2 weeks, people will be objecting to various facets of that plan. I was ridiculously optimistic. 8 hours later, people were objecting to various facets of that plan. Because of the sports plan, like the hospital and so many others, it needs to move from wonderful, well-designed intentions into the finished product. And so often these things haven't occurred. And it's not because of the plans. It's not because of the lack of finance. It's because the Assembly have tried to find a better solution. Of course, the Assembly acts with the best of motives, but the consequences are often financially disastrous. Before voting on this today, I would like members to ask themselves this. How many of these delays have saved money? And how many of these projects have even yet to take place? We don't have to look far, do we, sir, to see an example. The hospital, the gift that has kept giving, or more accurately, over the last 10 or so years, kept taking taxpayers' money with no return. If previous assemblies had shown some strength and leadership, millions, and I do mean millions, would have been saved. They didn't, and now costs have risen quicker than you can say, I know a couple of French chaps who'll knock a hospital up for £100 million. So, sir, have we learned from that? And I realise that further effort to delay will cost the taxpayer yet more money. Have we learnt from that? Are we over the next few months going to be seen as an assembly that, despite COVID, we made major decisions that will benefit the island for years to come? Or are we going to once again ask the taxpayer to pick up the bill for the assembly indecision? So we've heard some excellent, eloquent speeches in this debate, but I would remind you of the words of David Lloyd George, who said, "The finest eloquence is that which gets things done. The worst is that which delays them." Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Higgins.
Thank you, sir. Let me just find my notes. Okay, I've been in the Assembly 13 years, and anyone who knows me or what I've stood for knows that I'm firstly independent, and I'm not afraid to criticise the government when I feel it's justified and necessary. And I can never be accused of being a government toady. Now, I want to make a number of comments. Some of them were made by the Chief Minister, but I had these down beforehand. And that is, let's go back to what this thing stems from. Scrutiny are wanting to scrutinise this because, well, as some have said, oh, something smells, something's not right, and lots of excuses have been put forward. But let's go back to the tendering process. Now, the tendering process was carried out according to the best standards and procedures. Developers were asked to tender. Those that did were sifted according to set criteria until only 2 remained. There was the preferred bidder with the Broad Street site and a reserve bidder for the former Cyril Le Marchand building. In accordance with the tender process, the states entered into detailed negotiations with the preferred bidder, who, after entering into a formal agreement, then said they wanted to change their tender in a fundamental way. They were reducing the office side of it and wanting to put residential into part of the building. Now, that was a fundamental change. And if the states were allowed or allowed them to do so, it would make a mockery of this tender and any future tender process, as it means that any tender resulting in a contract could be undone immediately after it was entered into and renegotiated. Secondly, under the law, it could leave the states open to a lawsuit because they should have given, if they did open up the tender and agree to the changes, to all the other tenderers to put revised bids in. And if they didn't allow them to do that, then they could be liable. Now, this is a totally sensible thing what the government have done. They set out the tender, set out the criteria, everyone bid on the same basis. And then they accepted the preferred bidder. Then they wanted to change it. For the government to go along with that would basically have left them, I'd say, subject to criticism, not only locally from the other tenderers, but word would get out and it would be known internationally because this was put through the European tender process. And everybody be aware of the fact that these tenders weren't worth bidding for because it could be changed at any point at any time. So Jersey's reputation would be in shreds. Now, this information was given to members in the briefings that were given to members. I can remember asking questions about this, and I was fully satisfied with the answers that I received. And I'm sure that Scrutiny have had this as well. Now, Deputy Luce amazed me when he said he doesn't know how we could seamlessly move from one bidder, or the preferred tenderer, to a reserved one. Well, that's why you have the process in the way that it's done. You have a backup. And as the Chief Minister actually said in part of his speech, it helps you if the preferred contractor attempts to do something that he shouldn't be doing. You've got your reserve and you can pull away. I might also add that this is standard practice in major contracts. Now, under what's being proposed, it was mentioned how the financial risk is being transferred to the developer. Now, we own the freehold to the site, but all the risks associated with the design, build, planning, cost overruns are all transferred to the developer. And I personally think this is a very good idea. As someone who worked at the head office of one of the largest construction firms in the UK at the time, Sir Alfred McAlpine, these were considerations in all contracts that McAlpine entered into, i.e., do they enter into a fixed price contract or do they enter into cost plus contracts? Now, in a fixed price contract, the company is taking all the risks of all cost overruns, and it would be liquidated damages. Sorry, sir, are you hearing a distortion?
There is a slight distortion, but we can still hear you, I think, Deputy.
Thank you, sir. Yes, so all contracts that we entered into, many of them had liquidated damages clauses, which meant, these are the fixed price contracts, that if we overran by a week or a month, we would have to pay 6 fixed sums of money to the client for the overruns. So that type of contract incentivized us to make sure that we brought the contract in on time and on budget. And in fact, my job as a professional buyer was to enter into contracts, some for millions of pounds, for the materials that went into the building, whether it be concrete, whether it be block work, whether it be electrical, ventilation systems, you name it. Anything that went into the building, it was my responsibility to buy the materials for that. And we started off with the bill of quantities that the firm came up with, which were their estimates of what these things would cost. And that's how we based our bid. And it was my job to try and buy those materials at the same quality standard, but for less money. And every pound that I saved in the purchase of those materials was an extra pound of profit for the company. So tremendous incentive in that sense. The same was also true of the subcontracts I placed, whether it was for the demolition of the building, whether it was for the steel fixing that goes in the site, the concrete that went into the site, the block work, the painting, everything else that went into it. So you have an incentive to bring it in under what you estimated would actually cost you. Now, the alternative was a cost plus contract. And basically that means that the price you were going to get for the contract was fixed at a particular date, and any cost overruns over that, you would be reimbursed by the client. Now, of course, we'd be delighted with that because there's no risk to us. There's no great incentive for us to reduce the cost. The client's going to pay. So what is actually being proposed here is, I think, a sensible suggestion. Dandara, as the new proposed contractor, will be paying any cost overruns caused by whatever reason. And going back to Deputy Ward's comment about what happens in the future if they go bust. Well, when I was with McAlpine, we had companies that we contracted with that did go bust, but we also made sure as part of the contracts we had with them is that there would be a bond or there would be an insurance policy that would reimburse us in that circumstance. So as long as the states have got their contracts in order, and I believe that they have because they've got some good people working for them at the present time on this particular and other ventures, then I think those things will be covered off. Now, I just want to say a few other things too. Again, the flexibility of this contract. The point has been made, and I think it's a valid one. We can either purchase the building outright in a number of years. After 3 years, we have to give notice, and we can buy it after so many years, or we can lease it. Now, we don't know what the impact of the pandemic is going to be fully. We don't know what the impact of Brexit will be fully, because we don't know the impact that that will have on the finance industry. There's many other factors that are uncertain. Now, this contract builds in that degree of flexibility, and therefore I support it. We don't have to make an immediate decision, and we don't have to borrow immediately. But I want to address this whole thing. Some members, you see, different members are assailing the Council of Ministers from all sorts of different angles. For example, Deputy Ward is against private finance initiatives. I hate them. I think they're wrong. I think this one, however, the way that the financing can be done is acceptable. The Chief Minister said he wouldn't go with the type of private financing initiatives that have occurred in the UK and proved to be abysmal failures. So that is not an issue here, I don't think. Going back to borrowing, we have some members in the States, and in the whole 13 years I've been here, I've heard the arguments before. Borrow, no, on my dead body. When I first came in the States were expected to finance their expenditure every single year. The Fiscal Policy Panel actually brought sense to the States by suggesting that you finance over the medium term. In other words, you choose the economic cycle. So you're looking at, say, over 4 years. Much better type of budgeting. Now, borrowing has its place. Is there anyone in this island who doesn't believe we need a hospital? That we don't need schools? That we don't need, I don't know, there's lots of things, housing. We borrowed £250 million to give to Andium. Why? Because previous states, and I blame former Senator Terry Lamond as being one of them and former Chief Minister Frank Walker for this, the housing budget for maintenance was handed over to the Treasury. So no maintenance was done on the housing. When I came in the States, I can remember going to Palmer Farm and seeing the mold on the walls, seeing the windows. And anybody who saw the programme on ITV last night on the news talking about UK properties that weren't fit to be in, well, many of ours were. And it was because of underfunding and the diversion of the maintenance budget to that. So how did we get around it? Well, we had to borrow 250 million for two purposes. One, to bring the existing housing stock up to acceptable levels, and two, to build new housing. I also am prepared to borrow in the future for building more houses. Why? Because the rents we will get will help service the debt that we do and will not be a burden on future generations. The people living in the houses will be covering the cost of the debt. Other borrowing is acceptable for infrastructure, things that we need. We talk about climate change. We're going to need to spend probably hundreds of millions of pounds in the future for coastal defences. We want to have decent sewage works. We want to have facilities. We'd love to see Fort Regent. Well, okay, Fort Regent is a project for the future. Maybe there will be some borrowing, but maybe there will be private finance in it. The 100 million that was talked about for sport, I heard the Deputy at Trinity being reported as saying there are some private individuals who would like to get involved to help provide these facilities. Well, good. Let's share the burden, as long as the deals are right for the island. The 800 million that's talked about for the hospital. Is there anybody who feels we do not need a new hospital and we should have the best facilities for islanders? And it won't be for this current generation, it'll be for future generations because it'll be there for them. So I personally am not ideologically opposed to borrowing. And at the present time, worldwide, interest rates are amazingly low and we can lock into relatively low cost deals. So don't cut off your nose to spite your face. Let's look at the options, but I don't adopt dogmatic views borrowing over my dead body. That's totally unacceptable. I think I'm also going to come on to the political narrative. Now, I have been, as I say, in the States for 13 years. I have taken part in scrutiny for those 13 years, and I fully support scrutiny. But in my view, scrutiny over the last 3 years has changed. And it's changed in the sense it's become more political than it was previously. I'm beginning to wonder if we've crossed the line between being a critical friend and being used as outright political opposition. It seems that perhaps this is because of the rise of political parties. We have Reform, which used to be part of the government, who are now in opposition. We have the New Progress Party, which is made up of, well, one previous minister and an assistant minister, and probably others who support them. We have a number of hidden, we could say, political parties or alignments, where people are at the present time not coming out and may come out before the election, or they may be too fearful to come out in case people see who they associate with and don't want to be associated with them. So we also have some disgruntled ex-ministers, assistant ministers. There are people who feel they should have political office for one reason or another. So we have a number of competing agendas that are going on in the States at the present time. And I do believe that it is damaging. And I was going to write to the JEP at one point and say enough is enough and extol many of these comments I've got and give examples. Scrutiny has its place and should be doing its job. On this particular one, I'm
sorry, Deputy, I have to stop you. That's 15 minutes. We haven't brought a bell into the room, so I can't ring the bell, but that's your 15 minutes.
Okay, so thank you. I think I've made the main points.
Thank you very much. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to thank all members who have spoken for their many different points of views. It's been more than interesting because I came in here with a particular perspective on this matter, which I'll outline ahead. But there's no question that I've been thinking very strongly about the scrutiny aspect of this, and do we need to involve scrutiny more than has already been involved? And certainly in their comments to the proposition, the Council of Ministers document quite clearly all the scrutiny engagement, and there clearly has been a lot of scrutiny engagement. But it strikes me that a lot of this debate is actually about mistrust and mistrust of government, which I think is something which often happens within the State's Assembly, and particularly happens given or since 2005 when ministerial government came in, because rather than the Assembly having that sense of shared executive responsibility, it's now that responsibility is now concentrated in the hands of a few. And I think that does bring about a skepticism, one that I often share before I became a member of the States and continually since I've been a member of the States. So I understand very much why scrutiny want to, in a sense, cross the T's and dot the I's. Because if we look back at the history of this project, whilst it has gone through the government plan and whilst it has been on the table since, for a number of years within this government, there was a lot of surprise in the Assembly, including myself, when the Infrastructure Minister lodged the proposition or lodged the report about the land transaction for Broad Street and what would be the Le Masrier site. That came about, and not being on the Corporate Services Scrutiny panel, I wasn't expecting it and saw it. So I was very pleased that I believe it, Senator Mezek asked some questions about it. But then I think everyone was extremely surprised when that was suddenly withdrawn and replaced with this Cyril Lamarcon House project. And it's very understandable why people suddenly ask questions. It looked like there wasn't a strategic approach. It looked like the government was jumping from one project to another on something of a whim. And so it is right that people in scrutiny question that. And I believe it has been questioned. Those questions have been asked, and we've been given the answer, as Deputy Higgins just said, that the bidder or the winner of the tender and the Broad Street site materially changed that project without the government, as we understand it, without the government's go-ahead. They added housing to the project. That materially changed the bid And so because there was a substitute bid or a second placed bidder, we've been told that, you know, the winner of the bid was then told that they wouldn't be going ahead with the project, and that it would be the secondary bidder who gets the project. There is a choice, so that's the explanation we've been given. And really, the question is, as states members, do we trust that explanation or not? I find it hard to think that we've been given such a clear explanation of why the change went ahead and not have trust in that explanation. Because if we were to find out that that was not correct, then there would be a very, very high political price to pay. So I have to think to myself, hold on, we've been told face to face, all of us, that this is why the project changed. We then have so I've come around to accepting that's why the project changed. We then have the second aspect of this, which I think many people are concerned about, particularly in scrutiny, which is the unusual nature of the financing and the leasing of the land and so on. This is, after all, a state-owned site. Why are we kind of, as Senator Moore said, turning an asset into a liability? And it's taken a little while for me to get my head around that. But at the end of the day, if what we are being told is correct, then actually it seems like quite a clever financing option. We'll pay nothing for 3 years or 2 or 3 years till the site is built. Then we are committed to 3 years of rental. And then at the end of those 3 years, the states of Jersey, which by then will have a different council of ministers, will decide whether they want to continue that or purchase the site and so on. That 3-year break, the initial 3-year break during the build, gives us as the state of Jersey the opportunity to assess our finances in light of the COVID pandemic. And so there's some sense in that new way of financing. At the end of the day, if we were to just go out as the state of Jersey and source our own builder and say, there's the land, please demolish it or mark our house and please build us a brand new office block on there, we'd be having to pick up that bill from day one. And as we know, that would be, given the current economic situation and public finance situation, that would be a difficult situation that would put us in, because it would tie up money that perhaps we need elsewhere immediately in paying for something which we can't use yet. We'd have 2 or 3 years of payments for the build costs and we'd be unable to use that. And so there's, in my head, a lot of sense in that financing option. Of course, there are concerns about giving up, possibly giving up the site for 99 years. But equally, we have been told that, you know, the savings that we will make in achieving this are such that it makes a lot of sense. And I think actually we can all come down when you're in a situation like this. It's a good idea to try and find the common ground. And I think it's very clear that the common ground is the state of Jersey wants an office strategy and has decided for many, many years that it should consolidate all these offices into one or fewer or just a few buildings, and indeed this does that. So we know that there is common ground. We're all agreed that we need to build a single office building. The question is this the right way to go about it? There's been a great deal made of the SOJDC's lack of involvement in this project. But actually, we've been told the SOJDC has been involved in this project. They were invited to tender and they did submit a tender. That tender lost. That's what happens in the competitive tender. And I do agree with the comment that went earlier that said, you know, would we therefore be handing out all states contracts to SOJDC? Because if that was the case, if that's the attitude the states were to take, then our costs would rise significantly, because you'd essentially have a monopoly provider of all states building projects, and they would become rapidly very inefficient. So whilst it's a shame, and I still wonder why we can't use the International Finance Centre. We're told it's too small. Well, I guess it's only too small if you want it to be too small, because at the end of the day, you cut your cloth according to your needs, and so I'm not convinced that the IFC sites are too small. They're just not big enough for the aspirations that this government has. So I personally do feel there's a little bit of scrutiny that could be done there. I also wonder whether the government has really taken into account the changing need for office space post-pandemic. I do question whether that's really been taken into account, because I'd be very disappointed if the government is still expecting all its workers to be tied to desks. If that's the case, then that's a very short-sighted way of thinking. But is it enough to warrant these delays, etc.? I'm not so sure. But really, and I've been thinking very, very hard about this, because I've been very close to thinking, no, we should go, because I believe in scrutiny. I believe in good scrutiny of the government. But the thing that's convinced me to not vote for this proposition is actually the Gloucester Street Hospital rescindment debate. That debate, as I said in that debate, were it to win, and it did, that rescindment decision basically meant that we didn't move ahead with the hospital. It basically meant that we ended up with a much more expensive hospital, and it was second guessing a decision that had already been made by the government. And at some point, and I've said this many times whilst I was on scrutiny, at some point you have to let the government go ahead and get on with its work. Otherwise we end up, and Jersey is in danger in my view, of ending up being seen as a poor partner. I can see comments coming into the chat, and I just remind members the comments for the chat are only there for the function of this assembly and not for passing or not continuing the debate. And I apologise for jumping that role, but it was just off-putting to see these chats come up. So I was very aware that by rescinding Gloucester Street, we'd end up in the big no man's land, which in my view is, and I apologise to Senator Farnham, is exactly where we are. We've now got parts of the community telling us that we've made the wrong decisions, parts of the community telling us that it's far too expensive, that we've not got the right facilities in there, and so on and so forth. All that has happened with the rescindment debate is we've ended up extending this debate further and further and further. What we haven't got is a hospital. And as I said back then, if we carry on with the Gloucester Street site, if we don't continually second guess the decisions that have already been made, then we would have a hospital. And we would have much more of a hospital today than we do, because at the moment we don't have one. And so it's with that in mind that I sit there. It's got nothing to do with whether I'm a member of the government or whether I'm a member of the scrutiny. My thinking is purely, at some point, we have to let the executive execute their decisions. By not doing that, we are turning Jersey into an unfavourable partner when it comes to these big capital projects. But that doesn't mean scrutiny doesn't continue. I would expect the scrutiny to be very close on this, and particularly from the PAC side of things. I would expect them to look very carefully at the decisions that have been made. And if it is the case that decisions were made poorly, or that decisions were made with poor evidence, or weren't researched properly, and so on and so forth, then it is up to those who lead these decisions to own them. And so that would mean the Chief Minister standing up and the Infrastructure Minister standing up and saying, yes, we got that wrong. And that's why we, in theory, have ministerial government, so that ministers can stand up and own their decisions. And in my view, this is one of those decisions that needs to be owned. We send this to scrutiny. If scrutiny come back and then say, actually, you know what, it was all right after all, and then it goes wrong, well, then the State's Assembly is the owner of the decision, and that means in many ways there's no owner at all. So in this case, sir, I won't be supporting the proposition. I feel that the responsibility for this is being taken by the Chief Minister, the Infrastructure Minister, the Treasury Minister, in fact the entire Council of Ministers, and with them this decision will rest, and we will judge them on it. If things go wrong, then it is their decision to own, sir. They are the ones who have said we don't want more scrutiny. Fine, they won't have more scrutiny in my view, but should this go wrong, then I expect them to stand up and say that they got it wrong. And for that reason, sir, I won't be supporting the proposition. Thank you.
Much, Deputy Sutherland.
Thank you, sir. And I'll try and be brief and use Occam's razor, keep it simple, as Deputy Tadier so finely demonstrated to us. And I basically want to make 2 points. The first is, what is the role of scrutiny and when can they act? The fact is, and we've heard from the Chief Minister, that briefing after briefing, information after information was given to the scrutiny panel during last year, for example. But that was still policy in development and as such could not be scrutinised. You can't have a public meeting on policy and development. Chief Minister would have objected straight away if that was the case. Only when we've got the proposition in front of us can we then scrutinise. And it seems to me that this particular contract and this particular arrangement is crying out for good, effective, efficient and prompt scrutiny now. We've had a long and rambling debate yesterday and tomorrow. Lots of good points have been made. That needs to be boiled down into effective scrutiny to say that this is a good deal for us or not. And that can only happen from now. So we're threatened with this from the Chief Minister, who briefly explored the timescale of how scrutiny might work and ended up in September. We won't see anything before September. Well, I'm sorry, but if a scrutiny panel I was on couldn't do an effective and efficient assessment of what's going on, in this case, in less than 2 months, I think they're being very inefficient altogether. I think some sort of timescale that is not next September must be put on this scrutiny, and we should let them get on with it. The second issue I have to just examine briefly is this the statement from the Deputy St. Peter that our partner had taken all the risks, and I'm looking at that statement and saying, and what sort of organisation are they? Are they doing this out of the kindness of their heart? We'll take all the risks, don't worry. No, this is a very PFI-like structure where there are costs. There are down the line, either in the rental arrangements or in purchase or whatever. There is a profit to be made by this company for taking on that risk at the beginning of the process. And so I'm saying, some might say cynically, but realistically, there is something in it for Dandara. Don't worry, it comes, the payoff will come down the line. And with those two thoughts in mind, I shall be supporting this call for scrutiny and delay in order that we should properly, effectively, efficiently scrutinise, because that's our system. Policy is developed, policy is presented and scrutinised, and this is the way it should happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Martin.
Thank you, sir. And it's good to follow Deputy Southern and Deputy Higgins because of the, again, two different views on scrutiny. Deputy Southern knows that he and myself scrutinised the income support right from the beginning. We were in so many meetings. It was one that worked. It was a long process, but there was some good input early on, and there was amendments at the end, but we worked very well on policy and development. Scrutiny is evolving. I don't necessarily agree with the words of Deputy Higgins that it's becoming more opposition. It definitely evolves. It's not been going that long. It's 15, 16 years, and then every 4 years or 3 you get different people that guide. And I want to say to Senator Volvo, who said yesterday, scrutiny is not opposition, and I absolutely agree with that. When this proposition was lodged from the Scrutiny Liaison Committee, have had discussions around COM. And if you don't know anything about this Chief Minister, I'll tell you now, he will always try and accommodate where he can. We looked at the dates, we looked at seeing if there could be an amendment, if we could work, we could do any more. And unfortunately, it was all about the timing, that if we have this sort of delay, we probably would lose this project. And when we lose this project, sir, we lose much, much more. The Deputy of St Martin's sort of basically put, well, I want Cyril for housing, not office. Well, where would you then start? The catalyst of the office strategy. We need a big project. We need to bring all these 21 buildings together into 8, and we need to then free up and decide where all these others are doing. Deputy Gardner said yesterday, sir, that it doesn't really matter where it goes in St Helier. Well, to the people in St Helier and the businesses around there, it does matter. And I also want to talk about the people, sir. I'm the Minister for Diversity and Disabilities, and I want a brand new office space, not just for our workers, but for the public. Everything from Lamont Street would be going down there. Brand new facilities for our people to go in, the customers who go in and want to go in. Obviously, it's not open at the moment, but it's not the best building for accessibility for some people. I want to do this. I really think, sir, that today is, do we just delay? And it isn't an option. I've seen so many different office strategies bringing together since before 2005. And the main thing is you have to sort out your buildings, States buildings first. Liberator Act, I think it's finished the accessibility to the States building. And well, you'll know yourselves that these buildings that we're talking about, the 21, are probably very dismal. And that's why they got to go. A lot of our public can't get into them. Cannot get into them, sir. I really think if we could have waited and had the scrutiny done without this project being in jeopardy, this council, like we have done with many, many other things, would have accommodated scrutiny. We talked about, I'm echoing, sir. I can't emphasise enough, we talked about this, we cannot do it. Deputy Southern said, why would it be a September debate? Because if you read the proposition, we have to come back after the report in June. There has to be another proposition and another debate to say whether, I think it actually says to agree or otherwise of the states for the minister to proceed with the land transaction. Total uncertainty. With this government, you know, we can do some fantastic deals and our reputation is just getting shot. This one is one that not for the government, it's for the people, it's for all our workers. We've heard, you know, we need to have our workers in the best environment. Yes, be together, but in the best environment. And this will do it. I can't agree with this delay, but I will say there is no way that we didn't try to accommodate what scrutiny want to do. It was a time issue, and we just can't do it. So I really urge people who have not made up their mind, think of the public, think of the people that will need to be in this building, and think of all the other sites this will free up, and then it will have a fantastic knock-on effect, and they can be housing projects. If we don't do that, we could lose the whole thing, and we'll be back in the new Assembly saying we must have a States Office strategy and we must have a new States Office block. I'm not prepared to wait, so I've been waiting 16 years. Please don't support this proposition from scrutiny. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak on the proposition? Then I close the debate and call upon Senator Moore to respond.
Thank you, sir, and I thank everyone who has contributed to this debate and listened attentively, as it has been a long debate. Sir, this debate, let's just be clear at the very beginning, is not about delay. It's about allowing scrutiny to provide assurance and governance over what is a major project for Jersey and therefore contains risks. Of course, we all have different attitudes towards risks, and it was interesting that both Deputies Ash and Deputy Morrell referred to the debate on the rescindment of the hospital and the consequences of those. Deputy Ash suggested that delay brings with it greater costs, which is exactly what we have seen with the hospital situation, unfortunately, whilst Deputy Morrell argued that the fact that we moved away from that hospital has brought with it some other issues and ended up in a situation where we are not moving in what some people would see as a favourable direction, particularly with regards to the cost. What I would like to be very clear about in referring back to that rescindment debate in February of 2019 was that on several occasions members of the government assured States members that supporting the rescindment would deliver a cheaper hospital. Now, as both of those two deputies that I've just referred to have made very clear, that debate led to nothing of the sort. And it's issues and promises such as that, sir, that do lead to the sad lack of confidence that we currently have in government. That's borne out once again in another survey that has been published today, identifying significant concerns in some of the decision making. That, therefore, brings in the important role of scrutiny, that oversight and that governance. Yes, perhaps we should have brought in an advisor at an earlier stage, but sir, we have tracked this with the government over a period of time. But the majority of the valuable and important information and certainly the changes in this project have come in the later months. The procurement the papers that the Minister for Treasury and Resources referred to yesterday actually were not shared with scrutiny until the 22nd of September. And at that point, there was still big questions about which departments were going to be in the new building and which would not, whether Moria House was to be sold and all of the inhabitants of it put into the One Gov building or not. And those debates rumbled on for some considerable time. And at the last meeting we did have with government over the proposals for Cyril Lamarcon House, it still was not entirely clear which of the more arm's length organisations were going to be included in the scope or not. And so there is a lack of clarity and clearly a lot more work to be done with regards to this project. And so I would contend, sir, that not only would this pause for scrutiny offer greater assurance and clarity to both the public and the Assembly, but it also, sir, will enable the government to really get its ducks in a row and give it that a little extra time that it needs to firm up the project for itself and cross its I's and dot its T's. One absolutely critical thing members must consider very seriously is the lack of an estates strategy. So we're being told that we need to propel this, and yes, I agree with the previous speaker and many others that we do need an office for our government people, and one that is fit for purpose and modern. Absolutely, I don't think there's a member who has spoken today who disagrees with that. However, what we must be clear about is what we are doing with all of the estate. And the Comptroller and Auditor General, who the Deputy of St Peter referred to, I'm sure would like to see that in place first before so many different boxes, so many different projects are being put into boxes that cannot be changed once once the strategy is actually completed. So it makes no sense, sir, to tie the government and the island down to yet another major project when that critical piece, that strategy, is not yet confirmed, not yet in place, and does not have the agreement of this Assembly. There are also, of course, issues about value for money. This is an unusual structure. It is not a structure that we see in Jersey at all. It is not a structure that this government has entered into previously, and therefore it is important and valuable that some fresh eyes are given the opportunity to glance over it, to better understand it, to interrogate it, and to ensure that it is giving us value for money, not just for today, not just in 2026 for whoever is in the new government, but also for the great-grandchildren of the Constable of St Saviour and all of the other children of this island who will have to be paying the bills and ensuring that the island is well run in the years to come. There are risks around contracts that has been much discussed over the course of this debate, and that is also another aspect that the sub-panel that will deal with this, with members of Public Accounts Committee alongside Corporate Services members and Environment and Infrastructure members, will be able to interrogate and understand. And we have also talked about and again, this connects back to the lack of an estate strategy, that difficult decision between whether this is an office site or whether it's key worker accommodation. In fact, the Chief Minister did assert last year in a press conference very clearly that he saw the Cyril Lamarcon site as being a perfect opportunity to release quickly key worker accommodation, which we know is so needed. I've talked, sir, about the difficulties around the non-ministerials and which departments are going to be in the scope and which are out. We have also mentioned the role of Jersey Development Company, and yes, their bid was not successful. But there are questions to be asked about that too. So how the proposition P73 of 2010 played into that, and the restrictions that are placed around the Jersey Development Company within which it operates, and how that played a part in its ability to tender a competitive contract. I certainly feel that there are questions to answer with that regard. So also, construction is a busy market. There is, as we have all mentioned, there are a number of major construction projects currently planned for the island and going on. So the question does need to be asked whether this proposal is actually poor in terms of its timing, whether it will clash too much with the hospital project and others that are planned for this time, and whether it will cause overheating in that market, and actually, rather than providing economic stimulus, could increase costs and bring greater inflation to islanders and those private individuals and companies who will also be wanting to conduct capital programmes in the years to come, which we should of course all be supporting. So I go back to the main issue here. This is about oversight, it's about governance, it's about getting to the bottom of that bad smell that Senator Mezek can sense and others, and being able to offer the Assembly greater assurance in its decision making. Yes, and I have sympathy with the position of many, and as the Constable of St Helier has always articulated very well, there's a desire to do something. But this Assembly must ensure that in achieving that something, it is doing the right thing and not just anything. Today, sir, in the United Kingdom, we're waiting to see the Communities Minister bring a statement to the House of Commons with regard to problems that have arisen at Liverpool City Council. A report has been published, I think, in recent days about issues that have arisen there with regards to building and development projects. These are large projects. They are sometimes open to difficulties, and therefore any opportunity that provides this Assembly with greater assurance about the governance around significant projects should only be welcomed in my mind. And I really would urge members to support scrutiny in doing this piece of work. We will be prepared to do it quickly. We will turn it around as effectively as we possibly can, but we will offer greater assurance and we will be doing our duty to not just the Assembly, but also to the island and to islanders who have concerns about this project. So with that, sir, I ask for the appel.
As called for, and I ask the greffier to place a link into the voting box in chat. And the link is there. I open the voting and ask members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been defeated. 18 votes pour, 24 votes contre, no abstentions in the link. A further 2 votes pour in the chat, 1 vote contre and 1 abstention.
Could we have both pour and contre out, please?
Yes.
Those members who voted pour from the link: Deputy of St Martin, Deputy Dubley, Deputy IA, Senator Gorst, Senator Mezek, Senator Moore, Constable of St Lawrence, Senator Valois, Constable of St Brelard, Constable of Grouville, Deputy Ward, Deputy Southern, Deputy Gardner, Deputy Lehegre, Constable of St Martin, Deputy Pamplin, Senator Pallett, Deputy Tadier. And I see from the chat there were votes pour from the Constable of St Saviour and Deputy Tadier. And those voting contre were as follows: Deputy Labby, Deputy Guida, Constable of St Lawrence, Constable of St Clement, sorry, Senator Lafondre, Deputy Lewis, Deputy of Grouville, Constable of St Juan, Constable of St Helier, Deputy Pinnell, Senator Farnham, Senator Ferguson, Deputy Higgins, Deputy Truscott, Deputy Morrell, Deputy of St Juan, Deputy Martin, Deputy of Trinity, Deputy Wickenden, Constable of St Peter, Deputy Ash, Constable of St Mary, Constable of Trinity, Deputy of St Peter, and the Deputy of St John. And we also had Senator Ferguson, and then the Deputy of St Mary abstained.
Well, that concludes the ordinary public business. The remaining item before the Assembly is the in-committee debate on population policy. It seems to me that in any event we should adjourn now, and the only question is whether we continue this afternoon and begin the population policy debate, or we adjourn until tomorrow morning, until the matter, when the matter is then otherwise fixed to start. I had allowed a full day, which is a morning and afternoon, and if we start this afternoon, we will have the afternoon and tomorrow morning if members want to use it. But it is a matter for members as to whether we adjourn until 10 AM tomorrow or until 2:15 this afternoon, and a member will need to propose, I think, one or the other of them. Senator Valwai, you speak for PPC, presumably.
Yes, thank you, sir. On this particular subject, I took the opportunity to get a sounding from members last night. Majority have come back to suggest that we adjourn and start this afternoon. So can I make that proposal, please?
Well, yes, you can, and I can see it seconded. It will be seconded by Deputy Morrell. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm happy to second that, sir.
Yes, very well. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition that we adjourn and start this afternoon? If no member wishes to speak, then I will assume that we can take this on a standing vote unless someone wishes to have a vote in the link. So could anyone indicate whether they wish to vote contre, at which case I will have it in the link. No member so indicates, therefore I am assuming that this is a vote pour on a standing vote, and the Assembly stands adjourned until 2:15 this afternoon. Yep.